Bhagavat Chikshitang Aham. Bhagavat Chikshitang Aham. Karavane Yatandriha. Karavane Yatandritaha. Nayamanak Projak Saragam. Badhyeyam Yadanugrahat. Badhyeyam Yadanugrahat. Bhagavat Chikshitang Aham. Bhagavat Chikshitang Aham. Karavane Yatandritaha. Nayamanak Projak Saragam. Badhyeyam Yad Anugrahat. Please chant. Bhagavat Chikshitang Aham. Karavani Yatandritaha. Nehamanak Prajasaragam. Badhyeyam Yad Bhagavat Chikshitang Aham. Karavani Yatandritaha. Nayamanak Projak Saragam. Badhyeyam Yadanugrahat. Bhagavat, by the personality of Godhead, Shikshitang, taught, Aham, myself, Karavani, by acting, he, certainly, Atandritaha, instrumental, na, never, Ihamanaha, Ihamanaha, although acting, Prajasaragam, generation of the living entities, Badhyeyam, be conditioned, yet, as a matter of fact, Anugrahat, by the mercy of. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada. Please tell me so that I may be taught in the matter by the instruction of the personality of Godhead, and may thus act instrumentally to generate living entities without being conditioned by such activities. Please repeat. Please tell me so that I may be able to be taught. So that I may be taught in the matter by the instruction of the personality of Godhead, and may thus act instrumentally to generate living entities without being conditioned by such activities. Purport. Brahmaji does not want to become a speculator dependent on the strength of his personal knowledge and conditioned to material bondage. Everyone should know in clear consciousness that one is, in the execution of all activities, an instrument. A conditioned soul is instrumental in the hands of the external energy, Guramayi Maya, or the illusory energy of the Lord. And in a liberated stage, the living entity is instrumental to the will of the personality of Godhead directly. To be instrumental to the direct will of the Lord is the natural constitutional position of the living entity, whereas to be an instrument in the hands of the illusory energy of the Lord is material bondage for the living entity. In that conditioned state, the living entity speculates on the absolute truth and its different activities. But in the unconditioned stage, the living entity directly receives knowledge from the Lord, and such a liberated soul acts flawlessly without any speculative habit. The Bhagavad Gita 10:10 and 11 confirms emphatically that the pure devotees who are constantly engaged in the loving transcendental service of the Lord are directly advised by the Lord, so much so that the devotee unwaveringly makes progress on the path home back to Godhead. Pure devotees of the Lord are therefore not proud of their definite progress, whereas the non-devotee speculator is in the darkness of illusory energy and is very much proud of his misleading knowledge based on speculation without any definite path. Lord Brahma wanted to be saved from the pitfall of pride, although he was put in the most exalted position within the universe. So this is a very interesting comparison to the instrumental condition of the living entity, where he's either an instrument in the hands of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, nimitta matram bhava sabhyasacham, or he's an instrument in the hands of Maya, the external energy. Yayatama prapadyante. It was a very interesting comparison, indeed. We like to think that as devotees we're trying to become instruments in the hands of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, as is Lord Brahma, without being conditioned by our acts. But the separating factor is the consciousness. Without the proper consciousness, regardless of one's seeming position, just like Lord Brahma, he's in the topmost exalted position, but he's not under the illusion that due to that position, he will not be entangled in these acts of generation. Because one thinks, especially in that position, wielding the prowess of the most powerful living entity within the universe. This is not a hyperbole. Sometimes we see the materialists try to conjure some superhero, and in doing so they have to try to calculate what these respective powers of such a living entity would be. But there is no superhero without some weakness, at least in their conditioned calculations. But in the case of Lord Brahma, his only weakness is that he has a finite lifespan. Other than that, he's creating every living entity and assigning them powers, including the mystic powers, which put them in categories which we cannot even calculate. Anor, Niyan, Mahato, Mahiyan. These yogic cities, the 8 in number, the various mystic potencies, become bigger than the biggest, smaller than the smallest. They're able to travel anywhere, to have power over everyone through this direct influence, which some call hypnotism in the material world. Even the materialists have calculated something similar. They have these things, what is that called? Jedi mind control. Where that, simply by the power of suggestion, one is influenced to act against his will. So yogis have such powers. But all these powers, and of course Krishna is the source of all these powers, but Brahma is the empowered living entity, which assigns such prowess which is why Hiranyakashipu approached Lord Brahma, thinking him to be the supreme living entity. But he is not immortal. Therefore, he was able to grant him every other benediction except immortality. So this is amazing. Such superpowers are inconceivable. And therefore, he was able to conquer over the demigods. But the most significant power of all is that power, yeyatama papadyante, tam satarabhadhamya, that one can, in surrender to the Supreme Lord, defeat Maya. This is the greatest superpower. That one becomes free from the influence. He's not defeating Maya so much as in his mature realization, he's able to appreciate her position, subordinate to the position of the Supreme Lord, and surrender to the actual master of illusion. Maya is able to deceive the entire material cosmic manifestation with her mystic potencies. Even Lord Brahma is under her control, so to speak, thinking himself to be something other than a servant, which we'll see later. Initially, he's Tene Brahmaridaya Adhikaviye. He's given this direct realization by the personality of Godhead. But he understands that at any moment, he can be influenced by Maya, which is directly the Lord's superior agent. Because she's not simply another potency. She's not created by Lord Brahma. She's completely separate. And he, after all, is just a living entity, the most powerful living entity, but still a jiva. And all jivas are conditioned by the illusory potency. So what is the means of success then? If even Lord Brahma, he has to pray to be saved from the pitfall of pride. And that common saying, pride comes before a fall. Very interesting. Pride comes before a fall. So if one is thinking himself, his power, whatever it is, meager, superior, whatever it is a symptom of the false ego, forgetfulness of the Supreme Lord, therefore forgetfulness of his position as a servant of the Supreme Lord. And at that point, Maya strikes him, just like an infallible missile, which seeks out, like in the military they have what's called heat seeking. So the missile goes inexorably to its target. And once it locks on, there is not much that can be done. There are some countermeasures. And so pride is the weak point of the living entity. And Maya locks onto that. As long as it is there, and at a certain point, her potency will strike with full force, completely bewildering the individual as to what his actual position is. And therefore he falls down from his position just as much as the missile hits its target and causes it to fall from the sky. So there is no dispute in this regard. And we've seen, Prabhupada gives a nice lecture about this And he titled the Master's Disease. Master Disease. So this is the pride. This is the point. And one thinks himself to be the master. And he even mentions Lord Brahma in that lecture. Lord Brahma or the ant. Everyone wants to become master. And he says, to different degrees. It is the same illusion, but relatively speaking. Right? Lord Brahma is the master of the universe. Then the ant, what is he the master of? A very insignificant fraction of land, moving some grains of sand. But still he's thinking he's the master. So the master disease infects the living entity, and all these jivas are exactly the same, different bodies only, different consciousness according to that body. And somehow or other they're all thinking that I am the master. So pride is not just like the peacock who expands his tail feathers in order to attract a mate. That is one type of pride, certainly. People even say that. You've heard that term? Proud as a peacock? Proud as a peacock. And the peacock gives pride because he has some shiny tail feathers. So what is there to be proud of? It is not very much significant from the perspective, but it is demonstrated the same way. You see different living entities, they manifest this pride in their cars. You see people, just like the peacock, he walks around and he struts, but the human being has no such tail feathers, so instead he has an automobile, and he paints the automobile in a certain color, try to be unique, and he fixes it up in a certain way. He has a low rider, he has this, he has that. It's just an extension of the same mentality. He's trying to attract a mate. But the human being is doing it through a car or through some clothes, and the peacock is doing it through some feathers. So therefore, don't be proud like the peacock. Those tail feathers are not protection against the predator. Someone wants to hunt the peacock. His tail feathers simply make him a very big target. He's not very, how can you say, inobtrusive. So those same tail feathers by which he is so proud are the cause of his ultimate demise, because he cannot hide. Even when he folds them down, he has to drag them behind him in a very long train. And because of those also, he cannot fly very far. You see the peacocks in Vrindavan, they can only fly from the ground up to the tree at night. And they have to hide in a tree because they're so big and so vulnerable. They're not very fast. They can flap their wings a little bit and go along the field, but it's not very far. And so anything can catch them, even a big cat or a dog can catch them. They have some defense. They can fight with their claws. They're the enemies of the snake. They kill snakes very carefully. Same thing, using those big feathers. The snake doesn't know where's the head, and then the legs kill him. So everybody has their weaknesses. Everybody has their pride. And sometimes pride is the ultimate weakness, like with Lord Brahma, because nothing else can kill Lord Brahma. What can kill Lord Brahma? But he can be put into illusion, and he can fall from his very elevated position. And that happens all the time. We were just reading the Bhagavatam, that the first position held by the living entity in the material world is that of Lord Brahma. And if that's so, then there are so many Lord Brahmas who obviously have continued down the evolutionary descent. They didn't just remain in that lofty position. After 311 trillion years, they have to go someplace, either up or down. Many went down. So this pride, very dangerous thing. What do we say in ISKCON? Don't be puffed up. Don't be puffed up. What does that mean, puffed up? Puffed up means to stick out your chest, to think that I'm more important than I am, to not be at all humble. All right? Chanadapi sunichena. Why is there so much emphasis on this humility? It is not a very, how can you say, advertised characteristic or quality in the material world to be humble. Although great saints and sages, including Lord Jesus Christ, said, the meek shall inherit the earth. So there's great lessons to be learned about this. Humility means that one is eligible for the favor of God. Doesn't mean that he cowers in the face of some adversity. That's not humility, that's just cowardice. That's where the word cower comes from, or cowardice comes from. He hides. He shrinks. So we are not cowards, but with all humility at my command. Those are Srila Prabhupada's famous words. And his Vyaspuj offering to his spiritual master. In such eloquent prose and poetry, Prabhupada's humility is on display for all to see. It is not just simply by words, which he very tactfully criticized. Not just by words, not simply by an empty offering of flowers, but by action. And still he signs it with all humility at my command, because everyone has to adopt this attitude by practice. It's not that we see that someone may pretend to be humble, but at the slightest provocation, they become what's called incensed, angry. Right? So where is the humility? If I'm trying to offer all respects to others, how is it that I can become this, just unnecessarily angry? This is an important distinction. Anger is there. The Supreme Lord displayed anger in his incarnation as Lord Nrsingadeva. This is the greatest display. Right? In other incarnations, we see there's some action, like with Parashuram, but we don't see this anger manifest, this seemingly uncontrolled. When Jadharani showed Srila Prabhupada the painting of Lord Nrsingadeva, his comment, there may have been other comments, but the comment that struck her and remains is that he said, more blood. We see Lord Nrsingadeva, he's ripping apart with his nails the body of Hiranyakashipu. And so obviously, in such an act, blood must be there. It was a lion, when he attacks his prey, he doesn't just give some little nip on the neck. No, it's a violent encounter. Yeah, and then the flesh is ripped apart. But this is transcendental anger. We don't pretend to possess this righteous anger. No. Unless a devotee is threatened, we try to remain respectful and instrumental in the service of the pure devotee. Because after all, we are his representatives. And this is also a protection against the pitfall of pride. That one doesn't try to be something that he is not. You know, there's always danger in adopting this, like what do we do when we go to, you try to maintain two different personalities, two different persona. I'm a devotee in my actions in the assembly of Vaishnavas, but then I have to go to work and I have to be something else. This is a very difficult transition to make. It's not easy. Unless one has complete transformation of heart, he cannot manage this role play very effectively forever. It will at some point become burdensome. And so so therefore, devotees go to holy places because they don't have to make such a transition. They can worship the Supreme Personality of Godhead without any reservation, without any other consideration, without having to leave that situation and again go back to something else. But for servants of the pure devotee who has a particular mission, our surrender is to adjust to the will of our preceptor. And that whatever he does, whatever he says, if we follow carefully his instructions, we will be protected. So therefore, even when we're interacting with those influenced heavily by the modes of material nature, we will not become influenced to the degree where we will be subjected to the influence of Maya. Krishna will protect us. I mentioned yesterday, just briefly, because there are many devotees glorifying His Holiness Jayapataka Maharaj, that Maharaj used to print these bookmarkers on metal and give them out, sell them. You get them at the festivals. And this one particular bookmark, there may have been others, but the one that I remember was a quote from Srila Prabhupada that said, why should I worry for anything? I am the servant of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Why should I worry for anything? So in a nutshell, this is Prabhupada's outlook. There could have been so much cause for worry when he came to America alone, without any assistance from anyone. Some very nice person sponsored him, but they gave no real facility other than some accommodation for a month. And then he went completely on his own. With no seeming support. But those words, why should I worry for anything? I am the servant of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. The servant of the most powerful person. That is Krishna's description, the most powerful. We've seen that. Then why would I have to worry? Just like we see that so many VIPs, they have bodyguards. And it's because they have these bodyguards, they think I am protected. But these bodyguards are all fallible living entities. There's no protection. You've seen many times, even presidents, they have bodyguards, and still that they're assassinated, they're shot, they're attacked. But Prabhupada wasn't worried. So many things. Elderly gentleman, 70 years old, we would have so many things to worry about. Ill health, frailty. But he was not worried. These things were there, no doubt. He would say in the lecture sometimes that sometimes pain in the stomach, sometimes pain in the heart, sometimes pain in the head. Yes, all these things are there. And even in confidence, he would describe that from the time he came, he was never completely all right, health-wise. He suffered 2 heart attacks on the Jaladuta, and then a third one in New York. How this is almost superhuman. How is it possible? But his health was never perfect after that. And that was his admission to the devotees. And so that we could understand how much more difficult it must have been from one perspective, a material perspective, for someone in his condition to do what he did. From the transcendental perspective, he's the servant of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Anything was possible, and he did certainly the impossible. But from the material perspective, it was practically impossible. There's one, yesterday there was a memorial for some materialist who died of an overdose. And that overdose, what happens when you overdose is you have heart failure. You have a heart attack. So he died from a heart attack. Thousands of people came to mourn this individual. It was, for all his so-called fame, ultimately he's just another dead body. All right? And other dead bodies went and glorified him. But what is the use of such glorification? Dead body glorifying another dead body. There's nothing like now Srila Prabhupada's left us in 1977, so what is that now? How many years? How many is that? 46 years? 1977, 44 years. 44 years. And every year, Srila Prabhupada is glorified by tens of thousands of people all over the world, annually, continuously, practically speaking. There is no shortage of words to describe the bona fide servant of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. But these personalities, like the one who they glorified yesterday, after a few weeks or months, he's forgotten. He's in the dustbin of history. There's no lasting impression. Whatever accomplishments he had are, for all intents and purposes, useless. They're not redeeming. They're not auspicious. They don't benefit humanity at large. No. But Srila Prabhupada's books and purports, they're the law books for mankind for at least 10,000 years of this golden age of Kali Yuga. So we can make a comparison between those who have this false pride and those who are servants of the personality of Godhead. They don't have this detrimental quality of false pride. One can have pride. He can have pride in the execution of his duties. That pride can be there, not excessively. I think, my attendance at Mangalartik is perfect. No, that may be something. But if one is thinking that it's more than what it actually is, then that's false pride. Adherence to the order of the spiritual master gives one a sense of satisfaction. That can be there. The ayatma supersediti. Satisfying the Supreme Lord gives one self-satisfaction. So there can be satisfaction, but it is not pride that, according to the common definition. And so sometimes we see that someone who has pride, we realize that this is a prominent characteristic, and therefore it is a character defect. And sometimes it's necessary for the senior, like Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur Goswami Prabhupada says, to cut out this pride like a surgeon excises cancer. Excise means to cut out. Right? Just like one has a tumor, the surgeon removes the tumor very expertly with a sharp scalpel. That same scalpel can be used as a deadly instrument to kill someone. Right? But in the hands of the expert surgeon, he removes that false ego, that false pride. That is one of the talents of such an empowered personality, is that he knows how to cut out this pride and false ego, in order to give the living entity a fighting chance against Maya. Because as long as that pride is there, Maya has him compromised, completely compromised. He cannot escape. Right? So everyone knows that verse, we memorize it. As they surrender unto me, I reward them accordingly. Right? Maya is very difficult. She cannot be conquered in any other way. Not by Lord Brahma, not by Hiranyakashipu, not by anyone. Therefore, those examples are given here in Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam. Just for our benefit. They're not fairy tales, bedtime stories we tell the children to scare them or to enlighten them. No. These are necessary for us, for those who are sincerely trying to execute devotional service, that we should not become bewildered. And this bewilderment is not just some instantaneous darkness that falls over you dramatically. No, it can be very gradual. The softening of one's resolve through the agency of pride. One thinks, oh, I'm so good at what I do, maybe I should use it to make money or to become famous. Even as a devotee, someone can say. And the pure devotees are not disturbed by such things. The devotees in the airports in the early days distributing Srila Prabhupada's books would often be approached by professionals and say, hey, I can give you a job selling encyclopedias. You'll make a lot of money. Because they saw how expert in sales techniques that the devotees were in distributing Prabhupada's books. These people would sit there and watch the book distributors and realize these people have immense talent. But the devotees were not interested in making money, selling mundane literature. Why? Because they're servants of the spiritual master and Krishna. They were satisfied. Satisfied. When you're pleasing the spiritual master, you're satisfied. You're not thinking, I need something else. I have to go someplace and exercise my minute independence. No, one feels completely peaceful. And one should meditate on what is this term, that Atma Supersiditi. Because we're not talking about simply satisfying the bodily necessities. We're talking about satisfying the soul. This is the essence of Krishna consciousness. Right? We're distributing these books, The Science of Self-Realization. For what purpose? When we present this to the general population, this is their opportunity to finally understand the difference between the spirit and matter, the body and the soul. And his door to spiritual life is opened. He becomes truly inquisitive. Who am I? Who is God? What is our relationship? And any other questions, they're technically insignificant. Probably compared the birds, you could hear them in the background in the temple in Vrindavan. I was just giving a lecture. And he's using them as an example that even the birds, they're questioning, where is food, where is food, where is food? So everyone is asking questions, but they're not asking the questions which satisfy the self. So therefore we have the Śrīmad-Bhāgavatam, which answers those questions which truly satisfy the self. So we'll read the translation again. Please tell me, so that I may be taught in the matter by the instruction of the personality of Godhead, and may thus act instrumentally to generate living entities without being conditioned by such activities. Instrumentally means detached from the action, right? That's what instrumentally means. The hammer is not thinking that I just meant for this nail, technically. The hammer can be used in a variety of ways in the hands of the person holding it, either for good purposes or for bad purposes. But the instrument has no, how can you say, determination in the matter. So there's a certain detachment analogy in that regard. And therefore in the Gita it says one should just become an instrument, because the instrument is detached to that for which it is being used. Unless, of course, in the material world, he's being used, he's being played, he's being exploited. That's there as well. And one should understand this very carefully. These are the differences. To be an instrument in the hands of the Supreme Lord, or to be an instrument in the hands of Maya, which has very different effect. So don't be a plaything in the hands of Maya, but be an instrument in the hands of Krishna. Any questions, Bhakti Dylan? Bhakti Dylan is going to be a warrior for Krishna. Distributed so many books yesterday to the fallen conditioned souls. How many Bhakti stacks?
31.
31 Bhakti stacks. Who can imagine? And that was only in like, what, 2 hours? 3 hours?
It was like the whole day.
A little more? Because you guys went out what time? 12, no?
Yeah.
But then you left there around 3, no? Or 2, even before.
We did like 20 bhakti stacks in 2 hours.
20 bhakti stacks in 2 hours. That's got to be almost a record, 10 an hour. We'll have to see if we can, we'll have to note that down as a certain yardstick and see if we can maintain that. 10 bhakti stacks an hour. And the promoter, one of the promoters told me that they have more scheduled coming up because I guess they were given some concession because this is the first time they didn't do anything last year. The parks were completely closed. Just like we have our Rath Yatra this year on June 12th. They didn't let us have it last year. But there's some relaxation for certain types of permits, religious being one of them. But obviously that functionary yesterday was definitely not religious. In any sense of the word, except that many people were chanting Hare Krishna. As we were giving people prasadam all the time, people would say, oh, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna. Wow, I haven't had Krishna food in a long time. Hare Krishna. You know, sometimes you try to describe something. You know, you have halava sitting there. Some people say, oh, what is that? And we say, halava. Oh, halava. Oh, you are Krishna's. I haven't had halava in a long time. Because, you know, otherwise, well, what do you say? Oh, it's roasted semolina, and it has a nutty flavor, and it's cooked like this. You just say, no, it's halava. It's halava. Oh, it's halava. I know halava. They surprise you like you're trying to be kind of like tactful and describe it. You know, well, it's semolina roasted in organic coconut oil and organic, coconut sugar. And I said, oh, it's halava. They said, yeah, it's halava. So we had many such encounters like that. Of course, there are some people who don't know what halava is. But many did, surprisingly. We saw many people with neck beads, and everyone, you'd see people walk by, and they don't, look anything like you'd expect the typical devotee look. And they walk by, and then they turn towards you, and they say, hey, Hare Krishna, and they've got their neck beads on. And they say, you must have met people like that. I say, you met many. Hey, Hare Krishna. But they look just like everyone else in the crowd. So devotees are everywhere, and their influence is everywhere. And it doesn't really matter what they look like. If someone is wearing kunti mala, and another person recognizes that, and in his mind, he thinks Hare Krishna, then that person is a Vaishnava, without doubt. So we can be instruments in different ways to different degrees. And of course, the ultimate surrender is to become 100% engaged in the service of the Lord. There's no other meaning. When you say 100%, that's what it means. Sometimes we use this term indifferently, without full understanding of the definition. But 100% means 100% engaged. He's always thinking, how can I serve the spiritual master Krishna? That's his meditation. He's not thinking, oh, I have to do this for myself, or I have to do that for someone else. No. Just thinking, how can I push on this mission of the spiritual master? That's his exclusive meditation in one shape or another. It can be just a simple act of sweeping the temple, right? We sometimes chant that in the morning. That's there. So it is not just the act of sweeping, but it is the act of engaging Rishikena, Rishikesha, Sevana, Bhakti Uchate. Engaging the senses in the service of the master of the senses. For purification, for adding and reinforcing one's conviction. Because the more one thinks himself a servant, the more successful he'll be in spiritual life. So whatever activities you can do to reinforce that, attitude, that I am a servant, then that is your success. So try to do only those things which reinforce that particular category of, what do we want to call it, consciousness. Because as soon as one thinks that I'm not a servant of someone else, then I'm a servant of myself, my family, my country, my nation, my society, my this, my that. Otherwise, we're exclusively servants of the Supreme Personality of Godhead and His pure devotees. That is our consideration, in my humble opinion. Sometimes not so humble opinion. Sometimes we have to be careful when we use that term. Is it really my humble opinion? Are we saying it just to pretend that it's my humble opinion? Any questions or comments? Yes, Mr. Natabar, he beat you to it, Gopal.
Sorry, first of all, I apologize for being late. There was just a malfunction in the morning, I guess. And so when you're saying about Kalava, it reminds me that, like how, Prabhupada was like the prime person and one that did, make the whole thing popular. No one really knows who Srila Prabhupada, who Prabhupada is, Bhaktivedanta, no one knows that name. But they all know Halava, they all know Krishna, they all know Bhagavad Gita, they all know Hare Krishna Maha Mantra. Like, he made all these things famous, but he himself, like, took it, he was always pushing those, Like, they might never connect that to Prabhupada, but they know it's Hare Krishna Halava and like that.
No, even the whole idea of vegetarianism as something elevated from some obscure dietary consideration. There was, that practically that whole crowd yesterday were vegetarians, of whom many were vegans. They were doing all sorts of other nonsense. They were smoking herb and drinking, hops and all these other things. They're totally intoxicated. So it's not that just being a vegetarian is anything redeeming in and of itself, unless it's prasadam. But nevertheless, we see that the influence that the Krishna conscious movement had on elevating vegetarianism to the status, absolutely no doubt. And a point well taken, we see that. A lot of people don't connect it, but the influence is there. The influence. So this is something, just like we don't necessarily see the wind, but you see the effect on trees and how they sway and bend. So in this way, the Krishna conscious movement has an invisible yet tangible effect on society. And we must continue to exert that influence in a very positive way. This is our mission. This is Srila Prabhupada's mission. And therefore, it is our mission. To give the living entity to give the living entity Krishna consciousness, or the secret weapon. Prasadam is the secret weapon. There was some doubt yesterday. There were two huge containers, those thermos Rolo things. And, in the beginning, it was a little slow, like it is sometimes on Sankirtan. You go out there, it's a little slow, you're a little discouraged. I've got all these books, am I going to be able to distribute them? But then, gradually, all of a sudden, more and more people started coming. It's like word of mouth spreads. And then they announced it from the stage, and then more people came. And before you know it, we were telling people, we're out of Kitchery. And then we just had halava. And then we were just, we were offering vegan dessert. We're just passing out, get your free vegan dessert. Come and get your free vegan dessert. Catchwords, vegan. People would come over and say, vegan. And they would look and say, there's no eggs, no meat? No, it's vegan. Yeah. We were saying, come and get your free dessert. And they were saying, how much? We said, free. So it's always interesting. There's always something to keep your spirits up when you're engaged in a transcendental activity. So we're very happy for the opportunity to do such distribution of love of God in all its forms, books, prasadam, kirtan. There's all manifestations of love of God. Gopal Champalu.
We heard pride cometh before the fall. So how to recognize this pride and iron it out?
You have to have a very compassionate God brother, because we don't always recognize it ourselves unless someone illuminates us in that sense. Sometimes you catch yourself, yes. I mean, Krishna is within the heart. So if you're sincere and you do something out of turn that reflects this unnecessary pride, false pride, whatever it is, you may catch yourself. That's obviously the best situation, that you catch yourself before it happens. Even the karmis have that saying, right? Count to 10 before you speak words of anger or act. Give your mind a chance to catch up with your emotions, your intelligence rather. There's so many terms. The karmis know this. Think before you speak. Words have consequences. Never speak words in anger. So, all these things, what ultimately is anger in one sense, except, if I think I'm offended for the most part. And if I'm offended, it means my pride, my false ego, that was offended, or my sense of superiority was offended, You've done something in my presence which offends me, I think I know everything, or I'm the controller of all Vaishnava etiquette, and I can criticize anyone. No, this is not a good place to be. Anyone can make, like I said, if you have friends who are, this is the whole point, this Priti Lakshanam is not just, I scratch your back, you scratch mine. Priti Lakshanam, this is a very intimate relationship in one sense, where one is completely open and he can confide, he can share, he can reveal his mind without fear of being, how can you say, embarrassed or criticized. No, this is you tell your close guy brother that, what do you think about this? And then he tells you directly, I think that's not a good idea. And so hopefully you listen, because you trust as a friend that he has your best interests at heart. This is Priti Lakshana. These 6 exchanges, they're very important, so important. Prabhupada practically stopped everything to translate nectar of instruction. And then when it was printed, he'd say, immediately distribute. And it was only for devotees. It wasn't meant for mass distribution. There was only a few thousand printed. You look at the first printing, I forget what it was, a couple of thousand. Because there was only a couple of thousand devotees. So very important consideration, very important question. And yes, we have to not be shy. We have to maintain relationships with those whom we trust to act in our best interest. Not that if I go to this person, he's going to bite my head off, because I said something which, maybe they should bite my head off, but they don't, because they understand. There's a need for constructive, assistance in that regard. Why, is it dead?
No, it was just like this bottom thing was pushing this thing off.
Okay. So in any case, yes, Very important. I remember confiding in my God brothers confidentially and receiving their confidential advice, which was immensely helpful. My God brother Hansarupa used to remind me, not often, but when he said it with purpose. He said, Vrindavan is not a place to live. Vrindavan is a place to die. Because the tendency is to try to make any place, any situation, comfortable. But this is the downfall, that we try to make our situations comfortable. We get a nice house, we get a nice apartment, get a nice ride, we get everything. We try to adjust to the suffering in the material world to mitigate the suffering. It's not really possible. And the tendency is that if you go to Vrindavan and you see it as some place nice to live, like Florida, there's palm trees, or there's nice weather, and you think, okay, it's a nice place to live, let me live here. But then it's the same mentality. Let me build a nice house, let me get a nice motorcycle, let me get a... No. Vrindavan is a place to die, not a place to live. And so he would remind me, why? Because I was a grahasta, that sometimes you think maybe I should put down roots here and settle here. No, it's not. Prabhupada wanted us to go to Vrindavan, recharge our batteries, and come back and preach. That was his instruction to us. I mean, if you have a specific service, that's one thing. And yes, by all means, that service is there. Many people have service in India, and that service is continuous. It's not just 1 month. It's for years. But one has to be very careful about that service in the Dham. It is not ordinary. One should not, somehow or other, make some mistaken calculation. Prabhupada said, otherwise you're not in the Dham. Even though you're physically present, you're really not there. It's just another reflection of the material energy that you think is the Dham. So we have to be careful. Even in Radha Govinda Mandir, which is Vaikuntha, we have to be careful. Any other questions? It's a little late, I'm sure. Of course, we had an amazing feast last night. I'm not even hungry. But I don't mean to keep everyone else fasting. So we should go honor prasadam and go about our business and take into careful consideration Gopal Champu's suggestion about readjusting the schedule.
Yeah, so we're going to split in Mataji.
We have to ask others. I'm not sure how it affects everyone. How does it affect the pujaris? How does it affect the cooks? How does it affect the restaurant? It's just... It should be. I mean, on first glance, the impact appears to be minimal.